In 458 BC, the Roman Senate gave one man absolute power over the entire empire. He held it for 16 days. Then he went back to his farm. Nobody has done it since. Not Julius Caesar, who crossed the Rubicon rather than give up his army. Not Napoleon, who escaped from exile twice to reclaim power he had been stripped of. Not Robert Mugabe, who held on to Zimbabwe until he was removed at 93. Not the dictators, the presidents, the CEOs, or the influencers who promised to step aside and didn't. In 2,500 years of recorded history, you can count on one hand the people who have voluntarily given up real power when they didn't have to. And every single one of them appears in a story you already know. Today, we're going to find them. We're going to decode what they understood that everyone else missed. And we're going to give it a name. It's called the Cincinnatus Code. And once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it. In history, in fantasy, in the news, and in yourself. The year is 458 BC. Rome is in crisis. An entire Roman army trapped, surrounded by a people called the Aequi on a hill called Mount Algidus. The consul in command had made a tactical error, and now the army couldn't move. If it fell, Rome would be exposed. The Senate had one option: appoint a dictator. Not a dictator in the modern sense, a tyrant, a strongman. In Rome, a dictator was a specific constitutional office, an emergency appointment, one man given absolute authority over the entire state, above the consuls, above the Senate, above every law, but only until the crisis was resolved. After that, the power expired. The problem was finding someone the Senate trusted enough to give that kind of power to. They sent a delegation across the Tiber River to a small farm. They found Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus ploughing his field. According to the historian Livy, when the delegation arrived, Cincinnatus was working in just his tunic. They asked him to put on his toga to receive the formal news. He called to his wife to bring it from the house. She did. He put it on. He wiped the dirt from his hands. And then the senior ambassador informed him that the Roman Senate had appointed him dictator. Cincinnatus accepted. He organized a relief army, marched to Mount Algidus, defeated the Aequi in a single day. The consul and his trapped army were freed. The enemy commanders were forced to pass under a yoke made of spears as a symbol of their submission. He returned to Rome, celebrated a triumph. The city cheered. And then, with 5 months and 2 weeks left in his term, more than enough time to solidify his position, to accumulate wealth, to extend his authority, to become what Julius Caesar would become 3 centuries later. Cincinnatus resigned. He handed back the power. He went home. He picked up the plough. 16 days. That was all he took. Now here's the question that should be keeping you up at night. Why? Because it wasn't weakness. He had the power. The army was loyal to him. The Senate was grateful. The people loved him. He could have held that office for years, and there was nothing and no one who could have stopped him. He didn't. And for 2,500 years, historians have called this a display of exceptional civic virtue, which is true, but it's not the whole answer. The full answer is in how Cincinnatus thought about himself. The Cincinnatus Code has one rule. The role is not the self. He was a farmer who became a dictator for 16 days. Not a dictator who happened to have a farm. That distinction is everything. The toga was a costume. The plough was who he was. The moment power becomes your identity, the moment the role and the self fuse into the same thing, you can never give it up. Because giving it up would mean ceasing to exist. Cincinnatus never made that mistake. And Tolkien noticed. J.R.R. Tolkien read everything: ancient mythology, medieval literature, Norse sagas, Celtic legend, Roman history, and when he sat down to write the character who would become the hero of The Lord of the Rings, he made a specific, deliberate, almost invisible choice. He hid a king inside a ranger, and he encoded the Cincinnatus Code into that character so precisely that you can read the books 3 times and not notice it, unless you know what you're looking for. Let me show you where he put it. When we first meet Aragorn in the Fellowship of the Ring, he is sitting in a dark corner of an inn called the Prancing Pony. He's wearing travel-stained clothes, his boots are muddy. He goes by the name Strider. The locals think he's a vagabond, dangerous probably, but not important. He's 87 years old. He's the rightful king of Gondor, the greatest kingdom of men in Middle-earth, a throne that has sat empty for nearly 1,000 years, waiting for the heir of Isildur to return and claim it. He has known this since he was 20, and for 67 years, he chose the plough over the throne, not because he was afraid. He served in the armies of Rohan and Gondor under false names, becoming one of the greatest warriors in Middle-earth. He hunted Gollum through the wilderness for years. He protected the Shire, protected it for decades, without the Shire ever knowing he existed. He performed every function a king performs. He just refused the title, because Aragorn, like Cincinnatus, understood the code. He was Aragorn, a man, a ranger, a son of Arathorn, who was also, when the time came, a king. Not the other way around. The crown was something he wore when it was needed. It was never something he was. And watch what this understanding gives him. When he arrives outside Minas Tirith before the final battle, with the city about to fall, with every strategic advantage favouring a dramatic announcement of his return, he deliberately enters quietly. He heals the wounded in the houses of healing. He lets the work come before the title, because he knows that claiming the symbol before earning the reality would poison the thing itself. He waited 67 years. He could wait another week. Now. Turn the contrast dial all the way up. Paul Atreides. Same setup. Young heir to a great house. Extraordinary gifts. A prophecy that has been engineering his birth for 90 years. A galaxy full of people waiting for him to arrive and save them. Paul takes the power, and in doing so, launches a holy war that kills 60 billion people. Frank Herbert said in 1979, "The bottom line of the Dune trilogy is, beware of heroes." He built Paul Atreides specifically as a warning, a chosen one who chooses wrong. Not because Paul was evil, because Paul's identity collapsed into the prophecy. He became the Kwisatz Haderach before he understood what it would cost. The role consumed the self, completely, irrevocably. And once that happened, there was no Cincinnatus Code left to save him. Aragorn held the code for 67 years. Paul Atreides lost it in a season. Same myth, opposite ending. And the difference is one question. Who are you when the power is gone? If you don't have an answer, if the power is the answer, the throne has already won. In December of 1783, George Washington walked into the Maryland State House in Annapolis and handed his military commission back to the Continental Congress. He had just won the Revolutionary War. He was the most famous, most beloved man in the Western world. His army was loyal to him personally. Several of his own officers had written to him suggesting that America would be better served as a monarchy, with Washington as king. Washington said no. He resigned his command. He got on his horse. He went home to Mount Vernon to tend his farm. King George III of England, his enemy, heard the news and reportedly said, "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world." Washington's contemporaries made the comparison immediately, the one obvious to anyone educated in classical history. They called him the American Cincinnatus. He had read about Cincinnatus. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had modelled himself on that story deliberately. But here's what nobody talks about when they tell this. Washington didn't find this easy. He found it almost impossible. Because here's what modern neuroscience has confirmed about power. And this changes everything. Power is a drug, not metaphorically, neurochemically. When you exercise authority over others, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter responsible for the high, produced by cocaine, gambling, alcohol. Power activates the brain's reward circuitry in exactly the same pattern as every substance we recognize as addictive. It rewires the brain over time, reducing empathy, elevating paranoia, making the world smaller and the self larger. And giving it up. Giving it up feels like withdrawal, like dying, like ceasing to exist. This is why Cincinnatus is so extraordinary. This is why Washington is so extraordinary. This is why Aragorn's 67 years in the wilderness is the most mythologically significant detail in Tolkien's entire legendarium. They were all fighting their own neurology. Every single day they chose the plough over the throne. Their dopamine system was screaming at them to go back, to reclaim what was theirs, to sit in the seat and never get up again. They did it anyway. Now look at the modern world through that lens. The leader who promised term limits and found a constitutional workaround. The CEO who said he would step down at 60 and is now 72 and still there. The creator who burned out 2 years ago but can't stop posting because without the platform, they genuinely don't know who they are anymore. These are not failures of character. They are neurological events. The throne trap closes around everyone eventually. The only people who escape it are the ones who decided who they were before the power arrived. Because if you know who you are without the seat, you can always leave it. If the seat is who you are, you never can. Let's run the 4 figures one final time. Cincinnatus, Roman farmer, given absolute power over the entire empire, held it for 16 days, resigned, went back to the field, passed the test. The role was never the self. George Washington, Continental Army commander, offered a kingdom, resigned his commission, went home to Mount Vernon, passed the test. He was Washington before the war and Washington after it. The war was something he did, not something he was. Aragorn, rightful king of Gondor, spent 67 years as a ranger protecting a world that didn't know his name, wearing no crown, claiming no title, accepted the throne only when the moment demanded it, and even then came through quietly instead of announcing his arrival. Passed the test. Paul Atreides, heir of House Atreides, Kwisatz Haderach, Lisan al-Gaib, accepted the prophecy, accepted the role, let the identity of Messiah consume the person underneath, failed the test, and 60 billion people paid the cost. The Cincinnatus Code is not about weakness. It is not about refusing to lead, refusing to serve, refusing to step up when the moment demands it. Cincinnatus stepped up. Washington stepped up. Aragorn stepped up. The code is about knowing exactly who you are when the power is stripped away. The farmer, the Virginian, the ranger. The power was something they wore, not something they were. And that single distinction, that 1 millimeter of psychological distance between the self and the role, is the only thing that has ever produced a leader the world could actually trust with the seat. There is a moment in every life where something offers to define you. A title, a platform, a following, a role. And the Cincinnatus Code asks one question: are you the person who holds that thing? Or are you the thing that holds the person? The throne never changes. Only the names do. There is a figure in Norse mythology, in the Book of Job, and in the Witcher's storyline that every culture for 3,000 years has called the villain. The ancient texts call him something else entirely, and what they call him changes everything you thought you understood about why suffering exists and what you're supposed to do about it. That's the next one. Drop in the comments. Who do you think is running the Cincinnatus Code right now? In politics, in business, in culture? And who lost it?